that's one of the bigger differences to me in the fast that we read about in the New Testament versus the fast that we see in the Old Testament. But before we get into fasting, have you ever heard of a statement or a verse in the Bible that goes something like, be drunk in the Spirit? Fill your spirit. You ever heard those words? Where are they commonly found at?
Ephesians 3 and Colossians 5. I've probably got that backwards.
You're fine.
Ephesians 5 and Colossians 3.
Yes, and what are they specifically referring to?
Being filled with the Holy Spirit.
When?
Skipped over too many times.
Oh, you're fine. Just, it's okay. Okay? If I tell a typical member of this congregation, Ephesians 5:19, what instantly comes to your mind?
Instrumental music.
Thank you. Like, come on now. We know that. Right? What we oftentimes miss in that same text is where he basically says, don't get drunk with wine, but rather be drunk in the Spirit. And then he goes on to say, how are you going to do that? You are going to sing praises one to another. You're going to encourage one another. You're going to admonish one another in singing. So there's a physical act of worship that he uses to parrot, if you will, a concept of physical drinking. What I'm going to show you tonight is a story that you have read, I guarantee you, 100 times. And we're going to look at it, and I'm not changing the narrative. As much as I'm going to point something out to you, you have probably never noticed, because it's not the point of the story that you're typically taught. All right? So go to John chapter 4. I just realized I'm in Luke 4, so give me just a second. John chapter 4. We're going to read most of this chapter 9. If we don't get to these other two about fasting, that's okay. Because I don't want you to see something. Remember, we're talking about focus. We're talking about being filled. We're talking about spiritual food. All things that we're talking about here. Verse 1. When Jesus knew that the Pharisees heard he was making and baptizing more disciples than John, though Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, he left Judea and went again to Galilee. He had to travel through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the property that Jacob had given his son Joseph. It's a very important part of the story right there. That Jacob had given his son Joseph. Who is he talking about? Some random guy named Jacob? Or is this a significant Jacob? It's the Jacob. And what did Jacob end up becoming known as? Israel. Right? And what happened with that guy named Joseph?
He was pretty important.
What?
So he was pretty important.
He was pretty important. What did he do?
Brought the family out of their country into Egypt.
Yeah. Brought the family out of Egypt post-slavery, or brought them into Egypt. They ended up being enslaved, but before that, he brought them out of the famine into Egypt where there was plenty of food. He's also the only son that had two tribes that came out of him. They're both half-tribes. Technically had two tribes that came out of him rather than just one. It's very unique in that way. Stories about Jacob. This is a very important part of this story that oftentimes you miss completely. All right, we're going to keep going. Jacob's well, verse 6. What Jacob do you think built this well? It's not your question. The same one. There's no reason to mention the two back to back. All right, this is very important. You're like, well, Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, worn out from his journey, sat down at the well. It was about 6 p.m. Why was Jesus tired?
Walking.
To walking, to traveling.
Been traveling.
Let me tell you something else that we don't oftentimes talk about with Jesus Christ. I had somebody at this table in college. She's not looking at me right now. But she taught me when I was at Northeast. Does the act of teaching actually cause fatigue? Yes. Okay? I know we have more teachers than that. I just wanted to get her eyes up here for a second because I want to make sure I make this point. What's interesting is I had two guys, because one of the things that my team does at work is we were responsible for training and facilitating groups. And I had two guys that had never taught before in their lives, And they did 3 hours yesterday afternoon facilitation, and they did 3 hours today. And the number of memes I got that said, "I'm tired, boss," in various ways. I mean, we had the Green Mile, we had all sorts of stuff coming across, and I'm like, yeah, I'm tired of facilitating all those calls myself. I'm worn out at the end of every night. It's a physically exhausting act. Did Jesus teach a lot?
Every day.
Non-stop. So, anybody he talked to along the way, he's trying to convert, right? This is how he was. He's done this long journey. He's exhausted. He sits down by Jacob's well. Y'all know what's about to happen, right? It's where the Samaritan woman comes in. All right. What time of day is it? So, is this a time of day you would typically go grab water? No. Typically you get your needs in the morning, use them out throughout the day, or refill them in the morning. All right. Verse 7, a woman of Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus looked at her and he said, "Give me a drink." Jesus said to her, for his disciples had gone into town to buy food. I want you to get that mental image here. Jesus is walking with all those other disciples, and as we would say in today's vernacular with our youngins, as we would say, Jesus said, "You know what, guys, I'm going to check out right here. I'm going to pop a squat. I'll go get some food. I'm tired. I'll come back in a little while." This is the 100% human side of Jesus that we don't think of very often. He's physically exhausted from the work he has done. He literally just stops and says, "Y'all just going into town about food." All right, verse 9. She looks at him, the Samaritan woman, verse 9, says, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" She asked him, for Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Now, pause. Why do Jews not associate with Samaritans?
They thought they were a lower class of people. Is that right?
No, legitimately.
Yeah.
There was a significant divide between these two people. My question for you is where did the Samaritans come from?
There was half Jews and half something else.
Canaanites.
What?
Canaanites.
Half Jews, half Canaanites. If you ask the Samaritans where they come from, they will not tell you that. Samaritans' view on this is, where are Jews, descendants of Jacob? We worship on that mountain, because that's where he built the well. So we have this racial divide between these two individuals, right? We have the Samaritan woman that says, "You're talking to me?" And she just kind of pauses like, "You're not supposed to talk to me." Almost chastises Jesus. And I want you to get that in your mind about how that she basically put up her hand, if you will, and was like, "How are you asking me for a drink?" It also implies that she went out there at a time of day that was not normal for a reason. We know we're going to get that reason in just a minute. Verse 10, Jesus answered, "You knew the gift of God, and who is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would ask him, and he would give you living water." Verse 11, "Sir," said the woman, "you don't even have a bucket, and the well is deep. So where do you get this living water? You aren't greater than our father Jacob, are you? He gave us this well, and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Let me just put this in our modern day English. She looked at Jesus and like, "You crazy? No. You don't even have a jug. You don't have a bucket. One off, you shouldn't be talking to me. Second off, you ain't got a bucket. And you're talking about living water." And you're like, this is the second time she's kind of like rebuked Jesus. You know, you do that in your spiritual life all the time. When you know you're supposed to do something, you just don't. For some reason, you decide, "I'm just not going to go there." It's the same thing as what the Samaritan woman's doing. No difference. Just rebuking Jesus himself right to his face. Verse 13 is where things change. Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks from this water will get thirsty again." In other words, ma'am, you can keep coming to this well, and you're going to get thirsty every day. Whoever drinks from the water that I will give him will never get thirsty again, ever. In fact, the water I will give you will become a well of water springing up within him for eternal life. Okay, so unpackage that. What's Jesus talking about?
About salvation.
Yeah, legitimately talking about salvation. And he says, if you take water from me, I'm going to put a well inside of you that's going to spring up and feed you for eternity. You would think at this point that she has already rebuked him twice. She's probably going to be like, you are certifiably nuts. So let's see what she does. Verse 15, Sir, the woman said to him, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and come here to draw water. I love that part of the story. She's like, sounds good. Go ahead and give me that water. And I can literally, because there's certain women I think of in vernacular saying this to him. And there's a certain vocal tone. I have to look at the floor right now that I think she probably said it in. And every guy's looking at the floor now too because he knows what I'm talking about. There's a certain tone that the third time a woman chastises you that's not pleasant.
Can you explain that?
Just gonna leave that alone. Then he does something really politically incorrect by today's standards. Verse 16. Go get your husband. Is he playing the masculine card with her now? Is he being sexist? No. It may be how she thought it was coming across, but he's about to play something on her she's not expecting. He says, go call your husband, he told her, and come back here. Verse 17. I don't have a husband. I don't know in which manner Jesus said this. If it's one of those where he leaned back and kind of grinned, looked at her and went, mm-hmm. Or if he leaned forward and kind of whispered, you've correctly said, I don't have a husband. Her eyes start darting around like, how's he know this? What's he about to say? For you've had 5 husbands. And the man you have right now is not your husband. What you have said is true. What's interesting is it's almost like he said, everything you said before this has been a lie or a deflection. But you just spoke the truth just then. Now we know, based on how this conversation was going, odds are when she said that, she was evading the question. Almost telling him, when he said, go get your husband, if you want the living water, she's like, I don't have a husband. Go give me that water. You can almost see her saying it. That's when he gets it. He goes, yeah, you're right. You don't. You had 5. Now, what happens next? Well, verse 19. Sir, the woman replied, I see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, yet you Jews say that the place to worship is in Jerusalem. Let me explain what she just said. Let me just break it down for you. You Jews say y'all the only one going to heaven. Y'all get that emotional response? He tagged her, slapped her hard with that statement. Oh, you just spoke the truth, right? Then, I didn't talk about that.
Got it on video.
Then she deflects. She's like, she completely changes the subject. So which is it? Is the mountain where I worship, or Jerusalem where I worship? To understand this question, Samaritans believe they were direct descendants of Jacob or Israel. Their claim is that when all of them left and went into captivity, during one of those multiple times, specifically the one when they went off to Babylon, that they hid in those mountains and they didn't go and were rejected when the Jews came back. That's their version of the story. I have no idea if it's true. But she's basically saying, in our opinion, we're purer than the Jews are. Y'all the ones that got carried away. So watch how he handles this. You're like, what does this have to do with prayer and fasting? I'm getting there. I promise you I will. Verse 21. Jesus told her, "Believe me, woman, an hour is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on that mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know because salvation is from the Jews." Did he say salvation is the Jews? What is he saying when he says that? Salvation is from the Jews.
I am
Yes.
salvation.
I am salvation. I'm the eternal water that's going to spring up inside of you. Like, he doesn't even address the issue of whether or not the Samaritans' claim to fame is correct. He just basically says, y'all don't know what you're doing. You're trying, but you just don't have it figured out. The Jews have it figured out, but they're still messed up too, because it ain't about Jerusalem. Now here we go, verse 23. But an hour is coming and now is here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Yes, the Spirit wants such people to worship Him. God is Spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. He went through that twice. I'm going to share one thing about this passage that I think he is making a point here that most people don't see. The Jews thought they had the truth thing figured out, but they missed the spirit side. The Samaritans had the spirit side thing figured out, but they missed the truth side. And he says, if you want to do it right, you got to do both. I want your heart, I want your mind, I want your emotions, I want everything about you to worship me when you come in these doors. And you better follow the truth while you're doing it. In other words, both sides are wrong right now. Now, I can say what we're dealing with right now in our country is the same way. The point he's making here is you better worship in spirit and in truth. There's two sides of that. Verse 25, the woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything. And then he looks at her and he says, I am he, the one who is speaking to you. Now, let me show you what spirit looks like. A Pharisee, truth person, would start arguing with all the reasons why he wasn't the Messiah. And by the way, I'm not making that up. That's literally what happened in the New Testament. But I want you to notice the Spirit's response. Okay? Here we go. Just then his disciples arrived, and they were amazed that he was talking with a woman, yet no one said, what do you want, or why are you talking with her? They just walked up and were like, this is kind of awkward.
They were just kind of shunning her.
Yeah, and him, technically
For
speaking.
talking to her.
They're like, we don't know what to do here. Then the woman left her water jar, went to town, and told the men, come see a man who told me everything I did. Could this be the Messiah? They left the town and made their way to him. That's what spirit looks like. All he did was tell her one thing. It wasn't even a miracle. And she went and grabbed the whole town to come talk to him. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, where the truth was at, they all told Jesus he was nuts, that he was filled with a demon, and everything else. Samaritans had an emotional response, but didn't understand what they were doing. The Pharisees had a truth response because they didn't know what they were supposed to be doing and had no emotion whatsoever tied into what they were doing. They were too busy counting leaves. If you're a good Bible student, you get that joke and no one laughs. I'm never going to use it again. But anyways, here we go. Verse 31 is the verse you have never noticed in this passage. In the meantime, the disciples kept urging him, Rabbi, eat something. He's so tired on the way there. He doesn't even make it into town. And just stops at the well. Doesn't even have a pitcher to get water. They go to town to get him some food and come back. Think of this as a guy with a diabetic coma, almost about to hit. Sugars are low, hands are shaking, he's getting a little clammy. And they take off to town to get food. They come back. What are they trying to solve? The food problem. I want you to hear Jesus' response. My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Hang on. by the way. This is just coincidental. They're like, Jesus, you need to eat something. And he goes, I've got other food. That's what fasting looks like. That's all this tied up together. Now let me show you what filled up Jesus' stomach. And it wasn't that. This is what he said. Don't you say there are still 4 months? Then comes the harvest. Listen to what I'm telling you. Open your eyes and look at the fields, for they are ready for harvest. What were they looking at when he said that? Was it a whole bunch of Jews? What was running towards them?
Samaritans.
And he says, that's what you need to get full on. You worry about filling your bellies up in 4 months when the harvest shows up. Right there's the harvest. I don't need any food. I'm already full. That is spiritual food. And it should satisfy you the same way physical food satisfies you. And you're like, well, Jonathan, it doesn't. That's okay. We can work on that. But you've probably read this passage, I don't know, 100 times, maybe 1,000 times. And you probably never once thought about the fact that there was a second lesson that had nothing to do with the Samaritan woman, had nothing to do with the bottle of water, had nothing to do with her leaving her bottle of water. Jesus is actually giving a lesson to his disciples right here. He says, look, that's your harvest. The reaper is already ready, already receiving pay and gathering fruit for eternal life, so the sower can reap, and the sower and reaper can rejoice together. For in this case, the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap what you didn't labor for. Others have labored, and you have benefited from their labor. Now we can keep reading, and you understand that most of the Samaritans there would already believe in Jesus Christ after that day. The message I'm hearing about this, though, I want you to remember from tonight's lesson, is not about the Samaritan woman, but that the Jews, his disciples, were still focused on physical food. And he says, I want you to get full with something else. Later on in Ephesians, he says, if you want to drink something, don't get drunk on wine. Get drunk on singing to each other. You need to feel the tingles. You need to feel the hairs on your neck stand up. That's how you should be singing. Don't get uncomfortable when that happens. Lean into it. There is a certain lady here when she sings. I watch her hide her physical movements. And I'm like, why? Jesus Christ said there is a time to dance. Now, how many of y'all know Bob Floyd? How many of y'all remember when he had brain surgery and died on the table? Oh, you don't remember that part of the story, do you? He did. Guess who danced? Guess who danced? No, I was like 8. Juan Floyd. You don't know that because you weren't there. He was dead. They were talking donating organs. And those two people hit their knees. And when he came back in and said, I don't know what you did, he's in recovery. Well, Andy got up and said, I just want to dance. And Mom said that was the sweetest thing she'd ever seen. Now, she has the purest heart I think I've ever known. So it's not surprising. But when I see someone holding back, it bothers me. Because we're missing the point. When God said, do it decently in order, he didn't say, act like that chair. He said, don't scream at the same time. Don't the preacher be shouting while this guy's over here singing a song. Just get it lined up. He never once said, don't get involved. And so I sometimes wonder if we're so worried about the truth, we miss the spirit side, and therefore we aren't filling up our spiritual stomachs. And so we're leaving ourselves hungry all the time. And we say things like, I'm not getting anything out of worship. Or we say, I just don't know what he's talking about right now. And we don't realize it has nothing to do with the person leading the song or the person leading the thoughts and the worship about whether or not it's the preacher or the Lord's Supper. It's because when you came in, you didn't open yourself up and say, I'm going to pour it all out to God today. And get full on something else. That may make you incredibly uncomfortable. I'm sorry. This is an adult class where we're supposed to eat meat and potatoes, not drink milk. All right? Now, 2 minutes left in this class. Anybody got anything that they learned tonight that they want to share? Maybe that they didn't ever notice before. It's okay if you didn't. I'm not that good of a teacher. What are you thinking?
You know the verse in the Bible that says that you quench the spirit?
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a lady I visited one time, she was a client of mine, and I was a social worker. And she said that to me. She said, where do you go to church? And I told her, and she said, oh, that's the bread that quenches the spirit. She said that to me.
Yeah, I hope we don't do that. Hope we don't do that. No challenge again this week. You can do whatever you want to. But next week when we get into this stuff, we're going to have another challenge. We're going 24 hours. We'll wait more. All right? Thank y'all so much. Y'all have a great week.